Welcome to a fresh deep dive from Grow podcast series. I'm John, and today we're going to be talking about circular economy in mining operations.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting.
Absolutely. And to help us out today, we've got two reports towards a circular economy approach to mining operations
That's a good one.
and guidance and tools for circularity.
Yeah, they're really great reports.
Okay, so, some of our listeners might not know this, but what exactly is a circular economy?
Well, basically, it's sort of moving beyond that linear model of take, make, waste.
Right.
And it's more about thinking about how can we keep resources in use for as long as possible. So really maximizing the value we get out of those resources.
Okay, so instead of just, digging something up, using it once and then chucking it in the trash.
Yeah, exactly.
We're trying to think of ways to keep those materials in play for longer.
Exactly.
Okay. But how does that actually work when we're talking about, something like mining?
Yeah, well, that's where it gets really interesting. And these reports highlight some of the drivers that are pushing the industry towards this model.
Like what? What's making this shift happen?
Well, one of the biggest ones is just the increasing global demand for minerals.
Right. We need those for pretty much everything these days.
Exactly. And especially as we transition to things like renewable energy technologies and electric vehicles, that demand is only going to increase.
So we need more minerals, but we also need to get them in a way that's, better for the planet.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just about the environment. There's also a lot of pressure from investors and consumers and governments who are really looking for companies to adopt more sustainable practices.
So there's pressure from all sides to sort of clean up the industry.
Yeah, exactly. And I think circularity is really becoming a key part of that.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then another big factor is resource security. With all the geopolitical instability we're seeing these days, countries are really starting to prioritize having reliable access to those key resources.
Right. So it's about having a more stable supply chain.
Exactly.
So circularity isn't just, good for the environment. It's also, a smart strategic move.
Yeah, it really is. It's a win-win in so many ways.
Okay, now let's get into the details. How are mining operations actually embracing circularity?
Yeah, well, the reports highlight a bunch of different ways that this can happen, both at the mine site level and sort of beyond.
Okay, so give us a sneak peek. What kind of strategies are we talking about?
Okay, well, at the mine site itself, there's a lot of potential to reduce waste right from the start.
Okay.
So, for example, using techniques like in situ mining, which basically means extracting minerals with minimal disturbance to the surrounding environment. And then there's also this idea of rethinking the end of life for equipment and materials.
So instead of just scrapping stuff, we're thinking about how to repurpose it or even remanufacture it.
Exactly. And the reports have some really great examples.
Okay.
Like Goldcorp, they have this system called EcoTails, which has allowed them to recover up to 95% of the water they use in tailings disposal.
95%.
That's amazing.
It's a really impressive system.
Yeah, so they're basically creating like a closed loop system for water.
Yeah, pretty much. And there are also opportunities to bring in renewable energy and to use waste materials for things like water treatment.
So there's a lot that can be done right there on site.
Yeah, absolutely. But it doesn't end there.
Okay.
The reports also talk about how mining companies can partner with other industries to create these even bigger circularity wins.
So this is where we get into that concept of industrial symbiosis.
Exactly.
Where one company's waste becomes another company's valuable resource.
Right.
I think there was an example in one of the reports about the cement industry using slag.
Yes.
Which is a byproduct of metal smelting.
Right.
As a raw material for making cement.
So instead of ending up in a landfill, that slag is actually getting a second life.
Yeah, it's a great example.
As a building material.
Yeah, that's
pretty cool.
It is. And there's even potential for mines to support local communities through things like agriculture, using reclaimed land and treated water.
So we could actually see mine sites transformed into these, thriving ecosystems.
Yeah, exactly. It's a really cool idea. And there's an example in one of the reports about the Syncrude operation in Fort McMurray. After reclaiming some of their land, they now have a whole herd of wood bison living there.
Wow. So from a mine site to a bison habitat.
Yeah.
That's pretty incredible.
It's a really great example.
Okay, so we're seeing all these really cool examples of how circularity can be applied in mining.
Yeah.
But let's be honest here.
Okay.
At the end of the day, companies are driven by profits.
Right.
So what's the business case for embracing these practices?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I'm happy to say that it's not just about warm, fuzzy feelings. There are actually some really strong financial reasons for mining companies to go circular.
Okay, so what are we talking about here? What's the bottom line?
Well, for one thing, just think about all the cost savings that come with reducing waste.
Right. Less waste means less money spent on disposal and transportation.
Exactly. And it also means you don't have to buy as much new material.
Right. So it's all about efficiency, doing more with less.
Exactly. And then there's also the potential for new revenue streams by creating these value-added products from waste materials.
So instead of just, managing waste, they're actually generating income from it.
Exactly.
That's a pretty compelling argument.
Yeah. And then we also have to consider the growing interest from investors and companies that are really focused on sustainability.
Right. So companies that embrace circularity are more likely to attract those investors.
Yeah, exactly. And that can really boost their market value.
Okay. So it's a smart business move no matter how you look at it.
Yeah, it really is.
Okay. So we've talked about why circularity is important. We've seen some examples of how it's being applied. But how do we actually get there? How do we make this shift to a circular mining industry?
Yeah, well, it's a big change, and it's going to take a lot of effort from everyone involved.
So where do we even start?
Well, the reports really emphasize that this transformation needs to start within mining companies themselves.
Okay, so what does that look like? What kind of internal changes need to happen?
Well, first of all, they need to set some clear goals and metrics around circularity.
Right. So they need to decide what they're aiming for.
Exactly.
And how they're going to measure their progress.
Right. And then they need to get everyone on board. From the top executives all the way down to the people working on the ground.
So it's about creating a culture of sustainability throughout the organization.
Exactly. And that includes investing in research and development and piloting new technologies.
Right. They need to put their money where their mouth is.
Yeah. And they also need to be really good about tracking their data and communicating their progress.
Okay. So they can see what's working and what needs to be adjusted.
Exactly.
But it's not just about individual companies making changes.
Right.
There needs to be collaboration across the entire industry.
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, why reinvent the wheel if you can learn from each other's successes and failures?
Exactly. And things like developing a standardized system for classifying waste would make it so much easier for companies to exchange materials.
Right. It would be like a common language that everyone can understand.
Exactly. And of course, governments also have a big role to play in creating the right conditions for circularity to thrive.
So things like policies that incentivize recycling and reuse.
Yeah.
Or regulations that phase out the landfilling of certain types of waste.
Exactly. Things like that can really push the industry in the right direction.
So it sounds like it's going to take a collaborative effort from everyone.
Yeah.
From mining companies and tech providers to policymakers and even us as consumers.
Yeah, exactly. We all have a role to play in making this happen.
Okay, so before we move on,
yeah,
I just want to make sure I'm really grasping this whole idea of circularity in mining.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
But for me, what's the most surprising thing you've learned about this connection between mining and circularity?
What really struck me is that mining is often seen as the starting point of that linear take-make-waste economy.
Right. We dig stuff up, and that's the beginning of the line.
Exactly. But what if, instead of being just the beginning, mining could actually be a driving force for closing the loop?
So instead of just digging things up, mines could actually become hubs of circularity.
Exactly.
That's a really cool way to think about it.
Yeah, it's a total reframing of how we see mining's role in a sustainable future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm really curious to hear about some real-world examples of companies that are actually doing this.
Yeah, me too. So let's start with Rio Tinto. They have this really interesting project at their Diavik diamond mine in Canada.
Diamonds and circularity.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So they're taking copper wire that they're no longer using in their underground mining operations. And instead of just discarding it, they're actually salvaging it, transporting it offsite and donating it to community groups.
Oh, wow. That's great. So they're reducing waste and supporting the community at the same time?
Exactly. It's a win-win.
And it shows that, even small initiatives can make a difference.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. What else you got?
Okay, so let's move on to Anglo American.
Okay.
They're working on a really cool project in Brazil.
Okay.
Where they're using slag.
Oh, wow.
Which is a byproduct of nickel production in road construction.
Wait, you're telling me they're turning mine waste into roads?
Yeah, basically. And they're doing it in a few different ways.
Okay.
So they've donated some slag to a transportation company who used it to build a toll plaza. And they've also partnered with the local city hall to use the slag as a coating for unpaved roads.
So it helps reduce dust.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, that's really innovative.
It is, and it shows the importance of collaboration between mining companies and research institutions and local communities.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, what else?
Okay, so this next one is a bit different.
Okay.
Let's talk about Newmont. They're working with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in the U.S. On a project that's looking at using mine tailings to capture carbon dioxide.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty cutting edge.
It is. They're using this process called rapid electrochemical mineralization, which basically combines the tailings with CO2 to create carbonates. And those carbonates can then be used in concrete.
So you're telling me they're taking CO2 out of the air and locking it away in concrete?
Yeah, pretty much. It's really cool.
So it's not just about reducing waste. It's also about actively fighting climate change.
Yeah, exactly.
That's amazing. It does have a lot of potential, but there are still some challenges.
Like what?
Well, finding enough suitable tailings.
Okay.
And then making sure the process is economically viable.
Right. But it's still really exciting to see this kind of innovation happening.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, what's next?
Okay, so let's stay in North America for this one and talk about Teck Resources.
Okay.
They have a pilot project in British Columbia that's focused on recycling haul truck tires.
Now, those tires are massive.
They are.
And they create a ton of waste.
Yeah, exactly. But Teck has found a way to turn those tires into something valuable.
Okay, what are they doing?
They're actually recycling them into grinding balls, which are then used in the mine's production process.
So they're taking this waste product and turning it back into something they can use.
Exactly.
That's really clever.
It's a great example of a closed loop system.
Yeah.
And they're not stopping there.
Okay.
They're also piloting a project that uses waste rock to treat water.
How does that work?
They've developed this bioreactor that uses microbes to remove contaminants from the water.
So it's like a natural water treatment system.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. It sounds like Teck is really pushing the boundaries of what's possible with circular mining.
Yeah, they're doing some really innovative work.
Okay, I'm ready for more.
All right, let's switch continents and head over to Sweden, where we have Boliden.
Okay.
They're working on a project that aims to create cement from smelting waste.
Okay. How does that even work?
So they're taking this byproduct of their smelting process called slag, and they're using it to create this new type of cement that actually has some unique properties.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, it requires less calcium oxide in its production, which is the main source of CO2 emissions in traditional cement making.
So not only are they reducing waste, but they're also creating a more sustainable cement.
Yeah, it's a really cool idea, but they are facing some challenges.
Well, like what?
Well, getting the permits they need.
Oh, the dreaded paperwork.
Yeah.
Hopefully they can get through that and bring this to market.
I hope so, too.
Okay, what else you got?
Okay, so let's talk about Glencore.
Okay.
They're really focused on metals recycling, especially for those critical minerals.
Right, the ones that are used in EVs and other green technologies.
Exactly, and they have recycling facilities all over the world, and they're constantly expanding their capacity.
So they're really trying to make sure there's enough of those critical minerals.
Yeah, they're recognizing how important it is to secure those supplies.
And what are they recycling?
Oh, all kinds of stuff. End-of-life electronics, lithium-ion batteries. Anything that contains those valuable metals.
Okay, so they're trying to close the loop on those critical materials.
Yeah, exactly. But of course, there are challenges.
Oh, yeah, what are those?
Well, one of the biggest ones is just making sure there's enough material to recycle.
Right, they need people to actually recycle their stuff.
Exactly. And it also requires a good system for collecting and sorting all those materials.
Right, so it's a complex process.
It is.
But it's really important if we want to have a sustainable supply of those critical minerals.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so we've talked about some big companies, but what about the smaller players?
Yeah.
Are they also getting involved in circularity?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
In fact, the Guidance and Tools for Circularity report features a case study on a smaller company called Minera San Cristobal, or MSC.
Okay.
And they operate a mine in Bolivia. And they've done a really impressive job with waste management.
Okay.
They're minimizing waste generation, and they're recycling as much as possible.
Okay.
And they've even built an experimental biogas plant.
A biogas plant. Okay, I got to hear more about this.
Yeah, so they're using organic waste and sludge from their liquid waste treatment plant to produce biogas.
Wow. And what are they doing with the biogas?
Well, they're using it to generate energy. And they're even planning to use it to produce fertilizer.
So they're taking waste and turning it into energy and fertilizer.
Yeah, it's a really great example.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So it's really encouraging to see companies of all sizes embracing these principles.
It is. It's really inspiring.
Okay, so we've seen a lot of really great examples of how the mining industry is starting to shift toward circularity.
Definitely.
But we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah, there's so much more to talk about.
So in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to dig even deeper into the specific tools and strategies that companies are using to make this happen.
Looking forward to it.
And we'll also explore the role that governments play in driving this transition.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting.
Last time, we saw some pretty amazing examples of companies putting these principles into action.
Yeah, it's really encouraging to see.
It is. Now, I want to go a bit deeper into how they're actually making this happen. What are the tools and strategies that companies are using to really put this circular economy into practice?
So one of the reports, Guidance and Tools for Circularity, actually lays out a really helpful framework called RESOLVE.
RESOLVE.
Yeah, it stands for Regenerate, Share, Optimize Loop, Virtualize, and Exchange.
Okay, I love a good acronym. So break it down for me. What do those terms actually mean in practice?
Okay, so regenerate is all about going beyond just minimizing harm and actively working to restore those natural systems. So things like reclaiming land after mining or planting trees to offset carbon emissions.
Right, so it's about actually giving back to the environment.
Exactly.
Okay, what about share?
Share is all about collaboration. So maximizing the use of assets and resources through things like equipment sharing platforms or joint research projects.
It's about working together to make the most of what we have.
Exactly.
Okay, what's next?
Optimize. So this is all about improving resource efficiency and minimizing waste throughout the whole mining process.
So using technology to optimize extraction or designing equipment that lasts longer and is easier to repair.
Exactly.
Okay, and then we have loop.
Yeah, loop is all about closing the loop on those material flows. So reusing, remanufacturing, and recycling as much as possible.
So keeping those materials in circulation for as long as we can.
Right.
Okay, what about virtualize? That one sounds interesting.
Yeah, so virtualize is about dematerializing operations. So using digital technologies to reduce reliance on physical resources.
Okay, so using things like drones and sensors to monitor operations remotely.
Exactly. And even things like using virtual reality for training.
So less travel, less need for physical infrastructure.
Exactly.
Okay,
yeah.
And the last one is exchange.
Right. So exchange emphasizes those partnerships and collaborations that allow for the flow of materials, energy, and knowledge.
So that industrial symbiosis we were talking about earlier.
Exactly.
Okay, so this RESOLVE framework gives companies a pretty comprehensive approach to implementing circularity.
It does. It's a really great tool.
Now, besides this framework, are there any other specific tools or techniques that companies are using?
Oh, yeah, there are a bunch. So one that's really important is life cycle assessment, or LCA.
Okay, and what's that?
So it's a way of evaluating the environmental impacts of a product or process throughout its entire life cycle.
So from the moment those raw materials are extracted to when the product is eventually disposed of.
Right, and LCA can help companies compare different circularity strategies and make sure they're choosing the option that's best for the environment.
So it's about making informed decisions based on data.
Exactly. And then another useful tool is material flow analysis, or MFA.
Okay, what's that all about?
So MFA helps to quantify the flows of materials within a system. So like, where are materials going and how are they being used? And this can help to identify opportunities to reduce consumption or improve recycling rates.
So it's about getting a really clear picture of how materials are moving through the system.
Exactly. And then on the financial side of things, we have cost-benefit analysis, or CBA.
Right, because at the end of the day, companies need to know that these initiatives are going to be profitable.
Exactly. So CBA helps to weigh the costs of implementing these circular measures against the potential benefits.
So things like reduced waste disposal costs or increased revenue from selling recycled materials.
Right. It's about finding that sweet spot where sustainability and profitability align.
Okay, so we've got the tools and techniques, but what about the design process itself? Are there any specific design principles that companies are using to promote circularity?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the most important ones is designing for durability and repairability.
Right. So products that are built to last and easy to fix.
Exactly. Products that can be upgraded rather than replaced.
Okay. And what else?
Designing for disassembly and recovery. So making sure that products can be easily taken apart at the end of their life so those valuable materials can be recovered.
Right. So making recycling easier and more efficient.
Exactly. And then finally, there's designing for material efficiency.
Okay.
So using less material in the first place.
Right. Doing more with less.
Exactly. It's a core principle of the circular economy.
Okay. So we've talked about tools, techniques, and design principles, but what about the role of technology in all of this?
Oh, technology is absolutely essential.
Right. It's the enabler.
Exactly. So things like sensors and data analytics are already playing a huge role in optimizing those mining processes and minimizing waste.
Right. So using data to make smarter decisions.
Exactly. And then robotics and automation are also really transforming the industry.
Okay.
Improving efficiency and making those operations safer.
And what about blockchain? I've heard a lot about that lately.
Yeah, blockchain is really interesting. It's being used to track materials throughout the supply chain.
So we can see exactly where those materials came from and how they were processed.
Right. It provides that transparency and traceability that's so important.
And what about AI?
Oh, AI has huge potential.
Okay.
It can be used to analyze all that data, identify patterns, and make predictions that can really help to optimize operations and identify new opportunities.
So AI can help us to make those circular systems even more efficient.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're seeing a lot of really exciting progress, but I'm sure there are still challenges.
Oh, yeah, of course.
What are some of the biggest roadblocks that are still out there?
Well, one that keeps coming up is the lack of standardized systems for classifying and tracking waste materials.
Right, you mentioned that earlier.
Oh, yeah.
Why is that such a problem?
Well, it makes it really hard for companies to exchange those waste materials and to create those closed-loop systems that we're aiming for.
Right, if everyone's speaking a different language, it's hard to communicate.
Exactly. And then another challenge is just the lack of infrastructure for recycling in some areas.
Especially in those remote mining locations.
Yeah, exactly. So even if companies want to recycle, they might not have the facilities they need.
Right. And then on the consumer side of things, there needs to be demand for products made with recycled materials.
Exactly. If people aren't buying it, companies aren't going to make it.
So consumer education is a really important piece of the puzzle.
It is.
Okay, so we've talked about the challenges, but despite all of that, it seems like there's a growing recognition that circularity isn't just the right thing to do, it's also good for business.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we're going to see more and more companies making that shift.
Now, what about the role of governments in all of this? What can they do to accelerate this transition to a circular economy?
Governments have a really important role to play.
Okay, like what? Give me some specifics.
Well, they can implement regulations that promote circularity.
Yep.
Things like extended producer responsibility schemes.
And what are those?
So basically, they make producers responsible for the end-of-life management of their products.
Okay.
So it encourages them to design for recyclability and to set up take-back programs.
So the responsibility shifts from the consumer to the producer.
Right. And governments can also use their purchasing power to drive demand for circular products.
So setting an example by choosing products and services that meet certain sustainability criteria.
Exactly. And then there are things like tax breaks and grants and subsidies that can help companies invest in circular technologies.
So making it financially easier for companies to make that transition.
Right. And governments can also invest in research and development to support those innovations.
So pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
Exactly. And of course, education and training programs are also really important.
Right. Making sure that people have the skills they need to succeed in a circular economy.
Exactly. So it's really a multifaceted approach.
Right. It can take everyone working together to make this happen.
Yeah, it's a collective effort for sure.
Yeah. Well, this has been a really fascinating look at the tools and strategies that are driving circularity in the mining industry. But I'm curious to zoom out even further now. What does all this mean for the future of mining and for society as a whole?
That's a great question, and that's exactly what we're going to be talking about in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, I'm excited to hear it. This is a conversation you won't want to miss. We've been talking about the circular economy in mining, and I'm really excited to explore the bigger picture with you today.
Me too. I think it's important to think about the long-term implications of this shift towards circularity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So for this last part, let's zoom out a bit. What does this all mean for the future of mining and for society as a whole?
Well, one of the biggest things to think about is the impact on critical minerals.
Okay.
These are the minerals that are essential for things like, renewable energy technologies and electric vehicles.
Right, like lithium, cobalt, rare earth element.
Right, exactly. And as the demand for these minerals keeps growing, it's becoming even more important to make sure we have a sustainable and responsible supply.
And that's where circularity comes in.
Right, by reducing our reliance on those virgin materials and closing the loop on those material flows.
Okay.
We can create a much more secure and resilient supply chain.
So it's about making sure we have access to those crucial resources
Exactly.
while also minimizing the environmental impact.
Right.
Okay, so what else might we see as this circular economy really takes hold?
Well, I think the role of technology is only going to become more important.
Okay.
We've already talked about some key technologies, but there are even more exciting developments on the horizon.
Like what? Give me a sneak peek.
Well, artificial intelligence and machine learning have huge potential. Imagine being able to use AI to predict equipment failures before they happen, or to optimize those extraction processes in real time, or even to identify those circularity opportunities that we might miss.
So AI can help us to make those mining operations even more efficient and sustainable.
Exactly. And then there's blockchain technology, which offers that incredible transparency and traceability throughout the supply chain.
So consumers can be confident that those materials were sourced ethically.
Exactly. It's like giving every mineral a digital passport.
That's a great analogy.
And then another really exciting technology is 3D printing.
Oh, yeah.
Or additive manufacturing.
Right.
Which lets us create those custom design parts right there on site.
So less waste and fewer transportation needs.
Exactly. It's like having a mini factory right at the mine.
Okay, so it sounds like technology is going to play a really big role in this transition to a circular economy.
It is.
But what about the impact on communities and ecosystems?
Yeah, that's a really important consideration. And I think circularity has the potential to create some really positive benefits.
Okay.
For communities, it could mean new jobs and things like recycling and remanufacturing.
Right, so diversifying those local economies.
Exactly. And then from an environmental perspective, circularity can drastically reduce the overall impact of mining.
So less pollution, less land disturbance, less water consumption.
Right. It's about creating a much more harmonious relationship between those mining operations and the environment.
Okay, so it's a win-win for both people and the planet.
It is.
But let's be realistic here.
Okay.
There are always going to be challenges when you're trying to make a big change like this.
That's true.
So what are some of the potential downsides or roadblocks we need to be aware of?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is going to be the need for those upfront investments in new technologies and infrastructure.
So companies and governments are going to have to be willing to put up the money.
Right. And then we also need to think about the workforce. We need to invest in education and training programs.
Right. So people have the skills they need to work in this new circular economy.
Exactly. And we also need to be mindful of those potential unintended consequences. For example, if the shift to recycling isn't managed properly, it could lead to, new environmental problems.
Right. So we need to make sure we're thinking about the entire life cycle of those materials.
Exactly. It's about taking a holistic approach.
Okay. So it's a complex issue, but it sounds like there's a lot of potential for positive change.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, this has been a really insightful conversation. I feel like I've learned so much about the circular economy in mining.
Me too.
So as we wrap up here,
yeah,
what are some of the key takeaways you hope our listeners will remember?
Well, I think the biggest one is that the circular economy is not just some nice to have. It's really a necessity if we want a sustainable future.
It's about completely rethinking how we manage our resources.
Exactly. And I think the mining industry has a really important role to play in this transition.
Right. It's about seeing mining as a partner in creating a more sustainable world.
Exactly. And I think it's important to remember that circularity isn't just about the environment. It's also about creating economic opportunities and building a more resilient future.
So it's about people and planet.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. It's been a really enlightening conversation.
It's been my pleasure.
And thanks to all of our listeners for joining us on this deep dive into the circular economy in mining. We hope you learned something new and that you'll continue to explore this fascinating